Today, there are 2 million descendants of French-Canadian immigrants living in New England. These are our stories. Welcome to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Venez tous jeunes filles et garçons, je vais vous raconter l'histoire de notre immigration ici au USA, de grands aventuriers de pays étrangers.
This is the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast. I am Jesse Martineau. Now, this is a first for the French-Canadian Legacy. I think most listeners of the podcast will know that we have recorded a number of episodes in advance because I would be heading out to Quebec City. Well, this is the first ever episode that I have recorded in Quebec. So if I do sound a bit rusty, that is why. However, I can think of no better guests to be the first interview from Quebec than the guest I have this week, Daniel Moreau. Daniel is a student at the University of Maine and has an absolutely amazing project I am excited to speak about today. Daniel, welcome to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Thank you, Jesse. It's a pleasure.
Now, let's get your story before we start. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Lewiston and Auburn, Maine. So both cities. I grew up in...
No, sorry. I laugh always because they're kind of always linked together to the point where
absolutely.
People who actually think that they are just one hyphenated named city, but they are two different places, right?
There was a time a few years ago where there was a vote for a merger.
Oh, really?
It didn't pass, obviously.
Okay, cool. But you said you spent some time living in both places.
Yeah. So I really was born in Lewiston, but I really, grew up in Auburn. I went to, elementary school, middle school, and high school in Auburn.
All right. Now, obviously, these are some towns we've talked about quite a bit, places that are on the Franco route. What was the Franco-American scene life like for you growing up?
Before coming to the University of Maine, I really didn't notice a whole lot. I really didn't travel a whole lot before going to the University of Maine. And so my whole world was basically Lewiston and Auburn. And the only time I really felt at home outside of one of the mill cities was in Quebec because of all of the French last names that I saw.
Plenty of that.
And I mean, in Lewiston and Auburn, you turn the corner and you see Labadie's Bakery, or you see all these Franco names.
Yeah, it's cool. It's pretty fun. So they take it's not attendance, but you have a name on a list, like for security reasons when you go into the school that I go to. And the dude at the front actually knows who I am now because he has a super easy time pronouncing my name. A lot easier than those Swiss German names that he struggles with for sure. No, that's very, very, very cool. Now, so how about even in your family? What's your family history? What's your family background as far as the connection to the Franco-American story?
I think it was either my great-great-grandfather or my great-grandfather who was born in Quebec, but one of them moved to Lewiston. That was over 100 years ago. And my family's been there since.
Wow. My
grandfather, my père, he got into genealogy. And I don't know the whole story, but he became the secretary for the Maine Franco-Genealogical Society. His name was Normand d'Angers. Actually, he of fame at the Maine State House. And so whenever I go to a family gathering, some of my aunts and uncles will say, "Oh, you're following in your pépé's footsteps." And I'm like, I don't connect the Franco-American story just to genealogy. I feel that it's more cultural, at least in my experience.
Sure. What happened? What was the story of this? What's at the State House? I just caught the end of something at the State House.
The Franco-American Hall of Fame.
Gotcha. Oh, that's cool. And your grandfather's in the Franco-American Hall of Fame. That's awesome. Now, did you grow up, as far as in your family, did your parents speak French? Or did you have any, the traditions or the foods or any semi-stereotypical things you think of when you think of a Franco-American family?
Yeah, both of my parents spoke French. I think either my mother or my dad spoke French as a first language, but they both spoke French at home.
Oh, no. So did you have any of the traditions? Did you have the holiday traditions, or did you have food on the Franco side?
We always make tourtière on Christmas.
Very nice. With or without
Wait,
potatoes? That's an important question.
I don't know. No,
Okay, gotcha.
I don't think I'm at. I don't. So they haven't really passed down the recipes onto my generation.
Gotcha. So you haven't been the one in the kitchen making it yet.
Right. It's always the aunts and uncles, the kids basically
All right.
of my mère and père, who all go to wherever we're doing our Christmas party, and then they make like 5 tostières.
That's awesome. Very, very
To be
cool.
fair, it's a big family.
Well, I think my family can go through 5 during one Thanksgiving. I think it's very possible. But no, that's awesome. All right, so you grew up kind of at least aware of this kind of cultural connection between the Franco. First of all, did you consider yourself Franco-American? Did you guys call yourselves French Canadian? Did you call yourselves French? I'm always curious because I definitely hear different things.
Growing up, my parents always told me and my sister that we were French.
Just French. I like that.
Yeah. One time we all took a trip up to Quebec, and I don't think I was young enough to really know what that meant.
Sure.
When I heard that we were French, I thought we had a direct lineage to France. You know,
Sure.
someone in our family came from France. Probably.
Gotcha.
I bet it was probably my great grandfather.
Yeah, gotcha.
And you know what? I didn't really think much of it. I was looking around for college scholarships, and that's when I found something called the Franco-American Education Fund. And it was a scholarship that my sister got. I have a sister who's about 4 years older than me. She got that scholarship as well, and I decided to apply for it.
Sure.
And it required you to do an essay about what Franco-American means to you, something along those lines.
Sure.
And, you know, I just winged it. I put, you know, sometimes ma mère makes tostières on
Sure.
Christmas. I wrote that and they said, hey, guess what? You got a scholarship.
That's terrific. Now, who pays for the scholarship?
I think it's money from estates.
Oh, okay. There's like a specific organization that does the selecting of the winners of this scholarship.
Oh, the selection?
Yeah.
Selecting?
Yeah, who's the group that gets to pick?
I think it's its own foundation.
Yeah, it does. The scholarship has its own foundation. All right, that's cool.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Is your sister, by the way, I'm curious though, is your sister still involved in anything Franco at all?
Nope. She took, and you know what? That's fine. I'm the Franco in the family now.
There you go, sis. That is pretty funny. All right, good deal. So, good.
Oh, sorry. She did. She took French classes in high school, and she studied abroad in Vichy, France.
Oh wow.
In college.
Very cool.
But other than that, there's really nothing else.
That was it. That's the list. That's the contribution. Did you take French in school too?
Yes. Yeah. So in middle school, we were required to take 1 semester of Spanish and 1 semester of French. And in high school, we're required to take 2 consecutive years of a foreign language. And I chose French because, hey, that's more relevant to my family, and also I'm closer to Quebec, so it's more likely that I'll end up using that.
I was a lot smarter than I was. I definitely had faced with the same choice. I took Spanish, and I've regretted it ever since. Not that there's anything wrong with Spanish. That's cool. But I don't know. When I was like in 7th grade, it was like I had been around French like most of my life. So this is the first time being offered a chance Spanish is like the cool new thing. So that's what I did. And then by the time I got to high school, I already had 2 years of Spanish. So I may as well. And then by the time I got to college, I already had 5 years of Spanish. So I may as well stay with Spanish. I'm such an idiot. I think that.
Wait, so can you speak Spanish well?
No, not at all. It's been a very. Let me suggest it's been a long time since I've been in undergraduates and at a university.
I couldn't tell. You still look young.
That's great. I'm curious to see what Mike does with that. But yeah, no.
He's gonna edit that out.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, no, that's cool. So you did have the opportunity. I mean, did you know before you got involved? We could have talked about the University of Maine, and I know you're very active with that group there. Did you know about the Franco-American programs at the University of Maine before you attended the University of Maine?
It's a really funny story.
I'm looking for it.
So the first year of college, we were required to take a first year seminar. This was a one credit class with our advisor saying, basically introducing us to college life. And one of the assignments was to write down a list of, who we are, what our interests are, what kind of scholarships we got, and whatever else.
Sure.
From that assignment, we got meetings with our advisor. And when I met with my advisor, I was saying about how I didn't like this class that I was taking. It's one of those general psychology classes with 350 people in it. One of those classes you'd see in a movie that stereotypes college.
Yeah.
So I told him that I didn't like that class. And he said, well, we still need to fulfill those requirements, those general education requirements. And I see that you got this Franco-American Education Fund scholarship. So why don't we send you to this place called the Franco-American Center? And so we looked it up, and hey, Franco-American Studies 101. That fulfills 2 general education requirements. So, I mean, hey, 2 birds with 1 stone. Is that how it goes?
That's it. That is it. Yeah.
Excellent. It was about a week or 2 after classes really started that I went to this Franco Center. I looked this place up on Google Maps because, I didn't know where this place was.
Of course.
So, and so I put it on Google Maps, and I walked there. It was about, halfway across, actually on the opposite end of the campus.
And campus is not small there for anybody who has not been. This is a very big place.
No. I mean, what would you compare it to? It's not dense, I'll say that.
There's plenty of space.
Oh, yeah. And so I ended up at this, big white wooden building. I went in and I couldn't really find any obvious signs of a classroom, and so I found someone's office, the only person that I found there, and I asked, I'm looking for the Franco-American Center, and then she said, this is the Canadian American Center.
That's awesome.
The Franco-American Center is about a mile down College Avenue, and for those of you who don't know, College Avenue, it's a main road. It's only 2 lanes wide, but it's a main road. People go pretty fast on there. And so, seconds later, you see me speed walking, trying to keep my stamina down College Avenue, past the speeding cars, and then I end up on the other side of the campus, and I see this big white wooden building. Okay. I walk in, I find the classroom, and then a whole bunch of, say, 20 to 30 people are staring right at me.
I can imagine strolling in late, first day. Absolutely.
Yep. And so, you can picture me, a freshman.
Right, yeah.
Right out of high school.
Campus.
Socially
Absolutely.
awkward. When you're a socially awkward freshman and you get 30 people staring right at you, what do? But hope for the best.
I was going to say, what did you actually do?
I hope for the best.
Yes, having been a very socially awkward freshman at one point, many years ago. No.
We've all been there.
All right, cool. So you basically found yourself almost accidentally in a introduction to Franco-American things class. What was that experience, and how did that translate to? I mean, obviously you got super involved, super active with the group.
Yeah, it's my whole journey as a Franco-American is what I can only describe as one big coincidence, or several big coincidences right after another. After a while, I started to really learn what a Franco-American was, and I began to find out that the weird things about my family, socially, weren't really weird, but we're just Franco.
Sure.
So that's been my motto with my family. We're not weird, we're just Franco.
You put that on a
And
t-shirt. Yeah.
Susan Peanut was my professor. Yeah, that should be a t-shirt, shouldn't it? So my professor was Susan Peanut, and she has a superpower where she can look at a student, a Franco student, and guess what town they're from. She did that to me, and it was accurate.
Just by what you look like.
Yeah, apparently.
Do people from Lewiston, Auburn have a go-to look? Did you wear like a high school t-shirt or something?
No, I don't think so.
That'd be a giveaway. Yeah.
But now that you're saying that, I wonder. There might have been something obvious.
There you go. All right.
Now that I think about that.
Right now, so you're in this class. You're starting to learn more. How do you end up working for the group?
About a month or two into the class, for somehow, Professor Panette, found out that I was I probably told her that I was trying to get a job on campus, and I was applying to the IT place because I had way back then I took a couple classes at the local vocational center on information technologies.
Ooh.
And somehow she found that out. I probably told her. And she said, well, we've got a few computers upstairs. If you want, you could work for us and, just work on those. And I said, geez, I've been trying to get in contact with the IT center for 2 months. And you're just offering me a job right now. You know what? Let's do it. And so, they hired me on the spot because of my Franco last name. And Susan walked me over to this woman's office, and I introduced each other, and that woman was Lisa Michaud.
Very cool.
And on my first day on the job, they introduced me to the few older computers they had. And I didn't know what they meant by a few older computers, but they had 20 computers.
Okay.
And one was from 1986.
That's awesome.
So when they said older,
sure,
I thought they meant 2000, 2009, 2011. Not a 1986 computer.
Please tell me it had a floppy disk.
It had a place for a floppy disk, and it had no hard drive. It was a Macintosh 512K.
Love that. That is awesome. That's terrific. Yeah, who needs a hard drive? No, very cool. All right, so from there you get involved with the Franco programs, which is very cool. But I mentioned right at the beginning of this, and during the introduction, that you put together an absolutely amazing project. Of course, that is Dawson. And I have to confess, when you first told me about the idea from Dawson, it was probably like a year before you actually ended up doing it. In an email you had mentioned, I didn't get it at all. I had no idea what really you were talking about. It sounded cool. The idea sounded cool, but I could not envision it in my head. But I will say, to give him credit, as soon as I told Mike from day one was like, this is going to be awesome. He was very familiar with the platform, the video game. He knew all of that. So he, right from the very beginning, before he ever saw anything, Mike was on board saying, this is going to be a terrific project. And he was 100% right. So please describe. I was going to describe it, but that seems kind of silly when you're sitting here. What is Dawson?
Dawson is a 10-part video series where I combine the stories that I feel that so many New England mill cities have in common. Lewiston, Maine, Manchester, New Hampshire, Lowell, Massachusetts. The list goes on.
Right, absolutely.
And so I saw this story and I said, this isn't being told. really. And so I got the idea from this other project that someone else was doing on the city of Philadelphia.
Okay.
And I said, why don't I use this game called City Skylines, which is basically Sim City, which is a city building game.
Sure.
And I do 10 episodes, and I split 500 years into those 10 episodes, one era for each episode. In the game, I make a representation of what this area will look like in each era. And then I talk about those urban and those social ebbs and flows and those stories. I took all those stories from the New England Mill Cities and I combined them, or I found the ones that had all the same themes from these New England Mill Cities, and I looked at them and saw what they all shared, and more often than not, it was like all of them. Because I believe that the New England Mill City is its own different breed. And I took those themes and I applied them to a fictional city called Dawson. Now, Dawson has the same story as Lewiston, same story as Manchester. And so what kind of sprung from that is, in the beginning, I would do an intro, and then I would spend however time I wanted doing the narration. And then after that, I would do sort of this cinematic piece with music going over it. And the music would set the emotional tone for each era. And after that, what I call the cinematic, I would do the outro. And after a while, actually after about, I want to say 6 months of writing, I did not feel confident in what I was doing. I was talking to my roommate who was in anthropology at the time, and I said that I'm not proud of this. I don't think that what I'm writing flows. It doesn't make sense, and I don't want to do this.
Wow.
And so she mentioned this podcast called Dan Carlin's Hardcore History.
Very good podcast.
It's an amazing podcast. And so I listened to one episode and I was like, wow, this guy can do an episode for 6 hours and I don't mind that. So I really just listened to literally all of his episodes. I think he's out to like 66 now. I sort of took mental notes of what he was doing right. And from that, I deleted all of my writing.
Wow.
And I started from scratch. And I'll tell you what, I spent 6 months writing 10 episodes. And these are about 6 pages long. I deleted everything because I was not proud of that.
Sure.
And I started from square one again. I listened to that and I took notes from what he was doing right. And after over 6 months, I had a completely new script for each of them.
That's awesome.
And once I think it was in, I want to say October 2020 is when I did the first recording of the show. And it took me until March, I believe, of 2021 to do 10.
Sure. Yeah, no, it is really cool. I can see that now that you mentioned Hardcore History. That is a very cool. That's definitely in the running for second best podcast. I think that she does a really, really good job. What I think is cool about him, and I can definitely see in what you're saying, I don't think he has a script. He kind of has notes, and he just tells a story. And if that story takes him, 30 hours to tell, he'll just break it up into 6 parts or whatever. And that, it's almost like it's a podcast, but a lot of times it's almost closer to like an ebook. I mean, like an audiobook. It's almost closer to an audiobook with a lot of his episodes. He has like 6 parts on, the Mongolian Empire or whatever he chooses to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I do have a question then. So you come up with a fictional town. Did you ever think about doing a real town? Like, why Dawson and why not Lewiston? Or why not Manchester? What made you want to go in the direction of a fake place?
I have this tendency to be inspired by real stories, change them so that they're kind of my own, and do something new with them. Whenever I, listen to hardcore history or I look at the news or whatever, I see these themes sprouting up everywhere, and I say, hey, that would be an interesting story. With Dawson, I felt that if I was doing a single town, I wouldn't do the others justice, because I wanted to do the New England and Mill City as its entity. I didn't want to favor one over the other, but I know I kind of did practically with Dawson, because I took most of the inspiration from Lewiston.
Of course, it's your hometown. Yeah.
Exactly. And I made that clear in the first episode, the first few minutes.
Sure.
And so that's really what inspires me, is stories and themes and not specific things.
And the format that you have is super unique. Obviously, you mentioned you have your intro, and from there, you have this kind of narration where you are telling a story, and as you are listening, the viewers listening to you tell this story, on the screen you can see you putting together like the actual town. Like you're forming this town, which is very, very cool. And then it ends with, you kind of get like a tour. It's like you get a tour of the town that you had just created. And it's super, super neat. Did you always know that was kind of like the format you were going to be going for?
Yeah, to be honest, I copied that guy that was doing the Philadelphia series. I think his channel name is Do Not Eat, and the series is called Franklin. And I pretty much copied his format verbatim. He did an intro, and then he did the narration, and along that you can see him filling in the time with images of him making the city. And after that, he does music alongside cinematography, like a tour of the town as you describe it. I think that series was a big inspiration.
That's very cool. Yeah, I gotta check it. I mean, I lived in Philadelphia for a few years, so I used to work in City Hall, so I know that town halfway decent. No, like definitely that's something I gotta check out for sure. I would like to talk about the research for this, because as I was listening to Dawson, I'm just sitting there thinking there's not a small amount of research that went into doing this. A lot of the stories that we have talked about on this podcast, a lot of the stories that come up and stuff, that Patrick Lacroix writes about on his blog, those kind of things happen to the people of Dawson. And so that's why, to me, it was awesome, because I was just connecting with a whole lot of things, which I thought was really neat. So where did you go for this research? Because you pull in, events from Manchester, from Lewiston, from Lowell, from all these other places, and events that happen there. All of a sudden, you're able to weave that into your story of Dawson. So how did that process work for you?
Well, it varies on topic. For the story of the Abenaki and the Wabanaki Confederacy, that was very difficult, because you don't really have many primary sources from that era.
Sure.
And the ones that you do have are either from 50, 60 years ago or from the European colonists themselves.
Sure, yeah.
I was able to find this incredible book called Indians of the Androscoggin Valley. And it was from like 1930, 1920-ish.
Oh, wow.
And it goes into agonizing detail on the history and the aspects of the Abenaki of the Androscoggin Valley, like where Lewiston is.
Sure.
So that was one of the things. And say for the Franco-American story, I turned to people I knew, like Patrick Lacroix, Marc Parichard, David Vermette. I went wherever I could. I did most of my research online. I went searching for scholarly articles most of the time. I think the most challenging part of the research was I think it was episode 6, the one where I talk about suburbanization and urban renewal.
Sure. Yeah.
Because that's such a different beast, it's a bit more, it requires a lot of reading. Most of the books that I've read in the past year and a half have been on urban planning. They've been on how the city affects people. And I started off with a book called Geography of Nowhere by James Howard Kunstler. And then right now I'm actually reading Crabgrass Frontier by James Howard. And I've noticed that Geography of Nowhere is more of a social critic's perspective, where Crabgrass Frontier is more academic. So unfortunately, it was really a random choice between the two, because back when I was choosing which book to read first, it was sort of like, flipping dice just to see which one I would read first. The one that was written by the social critic James Howard Kunstler, I read first, and it was only until I was later in the series that I started reading Crabgrass Frontier, the one that's more academic. Honestly, I'm still reading it. Being a full-time student that's working and that's doing a senior project and winter classes, there's really not enough time for me to read. So I try to sneak in a few pages before going to bed. So that's why it takes me so long to read. Really, the research for the Dawson series is varietal and extensive. And one of the things that I adopted or stole, depending on your point of view, from Dan Carlin is how he works in quotes directly. He kind of introduces the context and then does quote, and then he says he reads the source and then he does end quote. And so I stole that, and part of me wanting to do that required me finding really good paragraphs in these resources for my research that would kind of sum up what the kind of theme or the story is for that episode.
Yeah, it allows you to advance the story for sure. No, that's cool. And then did you just, because the writing I think is very, very neat. It does not come across as, I can see, like I said, I can see the influence, because it's not like you're just reading out of a history book. It's somebody who's telling you a story. And I remember, I think it's the second episode, which starts with, "Do you believe in ghosts?" And I remember sitting there and listening to it the very first time, and I was like, I'm in. I'm 100% in. That one line, I literally hit pause after I heard that one line, and I was like, I am no doubt, there's 0% chance that I'm not going to finish this entire thing. Yeah, so I knew just the way you told the story without it being like a dissertation, I thought was really, really awesome. So did you sit down, just you, some notes, computer, and go? Like, how does that even work?
Yeah, you know what? I have to say, I'm so glad for the tabs feature on Firefox, because I had so many tabs open for my research that they were so small. So on my first tab, I had the doc open where I put my script. Unfortunately, unlike Dan Carlin, I'm not that good of a storyteller to actually put notes and go one to the other. I actually need to put a script, because
sure.
I'm a writer, not a storyteller.
That's like everybody else in the world that's not Dan Carlin.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so I had the document on one tab, the first tab, and then I had like 20 of my sources. And then the first thing I did for the script was I said, this is the span of the year. It's going from this year to this year. And then I list about what kind of things happen. And one thing that has been really helpful in my studies as an engineering student is the thing that everyone loves, the work breakdown structure, where you take one topic, or you list as many topics as you can, and then for each topic you list as many subtopics as you can,
okay,
and then so on until you're exhausted.
Oh wow.
So that was really helpful with saying what's happening in this era. And so I did research for each, what I call a story, the things that are happening.
Sure.
Each story, I find sources, and I connect between the two, or between each one. I say, this one happens because of this, and then so that this happens, and then so
Sure. Yep.
my first scripts, the one before Dan Carlin, they were more, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened.
Yep.
And that's why I wasn't proud of my work before then. It didn't move right.
Sure. It didn't feel like a story as much as like a recitation, kind of a facts almost.
Yeah, a bullet point list.
What I thought was kind of fun, the actual towns themselves. Like when you're putting together the towns, like how do you go about, what did the architecture, for instance, look like in this period? Or what would even like, there's bridges, obviously. What would a bridge have looked like? Or what would the roads have looked like? Like, how did you even put that together when it came time to put together these towns?
It took a lot of research. I also tried looking at images from these cities. And one of the most difficult things when trying to say, what would have a road look like in this era? The most difficult part in finding that out is to differentiate what they look like in New York City compared to, say, Poland, Maine. When I was doing that, all I can say is I tried my best. And one of the big things that really hurt me in the series in terms of the visuals is the fact that Cities Skylines is not a game that's based on history. This game has something called assets, which are basically custom models, custom buildings, and custom vehicles. And there's a lot of them that people have made. And it took me a long, long time before I started recording each episode to actually find the assets that would fit the era.
Gotcha. Sure.
And more often than not, especially in the older episodes, I wasn't able to find all the assets and the buildings that I wanted to. So that's what really kind of hampered the visuals, is me being limited to only what I could find.
Sure.
But I think I did okay.
I think you did great. I think you did really good. Yeah, no, I thought it was very, very cool. I didn't even realize that it was like almost like a shopping list, and you only have so many, items that you could possibly choose from when it comes to putting together. Because you put together a whole town, it's not like there's the same building 17 times over and over and over again. There's a wide variety depending on where it is. Because there's a river. What do the places look like closer to the river, further from the river? Yeah, no, it's really, really neat. I can't imagine that, especially as you're describing. I cannot imagine that was easy.
Yeah, no, I mean it's 3 towns too, because not only is there Dawson, which is the main New England mill city with the mills and whatever, but there's also White, which is basically what Auburn is to Lewiston, or what I can't think of any other examples. Brewer to Bangor.
Or Chelmsford, East Chelmsford to Lowell. Yep, that kind of area.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, basically the suburban overflow town, which did have a little bit of development early on, but really only kind of started thriving when suburbanization and urban renewal hit, and people started moving away from the city. And then there's also a town called Stamford, which is really the Anglo-Saxon Protestant town where the area was first settled. And so the dichotomy between Dawson and Stamford is really, Stamford is traditionalist, well, not really Puritan, but
Puritan
farming town.
Yeah.
Yeah. It very, very simple. It's very New England. It's what you would see on a New England poster or magazine. And then Dawson is what you really wouldn't see on a poster, a New England poster. Dawson is grimy. It's where the working people live. It's where the working people work.
All right. Well, I want to ask about the music then, because like we had said, you kind of end by, you're almost going like on a helicopter ride through this new town that you have just created while some music's playing. How did you pick what you were going to use for the music for this little virtual helicopter ride through your town?
So that series that I was inspired by, the Franklin series on Philadelphia, I actually asked that guy about where he got his music, and he said this website called Muse Open, which is royalty-free classical music.
Nice.
What I really wanted to do for that first episode was a song called Vorspiel from Das Rheingold, which is Das Rheingold is a Richard Wagner opera. And the reason why I chose that song specifically is because it was featured in a 2005 movie called The New World, which is about the European colonists' first contact with the Native Americans. And it features the real version of the John Smith and Pocahontas story.
Oh, cool.
And it's a very experimental and artsy film, and there's really not a lot of dialogue. And that song just plays, and it's very beautiful. Just seeing the nature, and the song is very fitting. And so I chose that. For the others, it was really going through Musopen and seeing which ones I kind of, I vibed with.
Sure.
The one that was about the churches, or the episode that was about the churches, I chose Bach's Fugue in D minor, which is one of my favorite classical songs. Everybody knows the toccata, which is
Indeed, yes.
But after a couple, 2 or 3 minutes into that song, there's the fugue, which is art. It's essentially, it sounds like modern techno, but on an organ. That's what I could describe it as. And so just because I love that song so much, I chose that for the episode that focused on the churches. For the one that was the one about the suburbanization and urban renewal, I chose this very experimental song, which sounds very uneasy. So for that episode, I really chose this uneasy feeling song.
Certainly feels uneasy, absolutely.
Yeah. Because the kind of emotion that I wanted to capture is, you're demolishing half of a town and you're paving it over. There's a song that I'm thinking of by the Pretenders. My City Was Gone by the Pretenders. And it's uneasy feeling, and it's capturing that emotion of, demolishing that town or half of it.
Yeah.
And I want people to feel that.
Yeah, changing what the kind of the nature of what the town was.
Yeah.
No, that's very cool. No, that's interesting. So you did that for every episode. So you would have finished all the visuals. You would have had your visuals, and then gone back and been like, I need a song. Very, very.
Well,
cool.
actually, no. I would do the song first, and then I would do the visuals, just so I knew how much footage I needed.
Gotcha. Oh, that's very cool.
If it was a long song, I would go for a while. If it was a short song, I would say, hey, I've already got enough footage.
No, that's cool. Yeah, and you talked to the guy you said who did that Franklin series?
Yeah. On Twitter way back when I was starting this.
Did you send him the final? Did you send him Dawson?
I think I mentioned I kind of atted him in a tweet when I
sure.
on my first series, and I got a like.
Nice. Okay, so he knows it exists.
Hopefully. Maybe he remembers.
No, I would imagine. All right, that's cool. No, I like that. And you have 10 episodes just because it's a nice flat round number, or did it actually work out where you had 10 stories you wanted to tell? I guess I'm asking, did you start with 10 and then divide, or did you just go, all right, this is a period, this is a period, this is a period, and then at the end you counted and you had 10 periods?
It was the latter. Originally, I actually started with like 11 or 12. There weren't enough stories for one or two of the eras, and so I combined them just to make them more meaty.
Gotcha. That's cool. And so you had 10 different stories you wanted to tell, which is the only reason you have 10 episodes. Just happened to work out to a nice round number. Very, very fun. That's
I like
cool.
even numbers.
Now, for those who haven't, how do you end Dawson? When's the last of Dawson? Where do you leave us with this city of Dawson?
So the end of Dawson is episode 10, being at 10 episodes. And I span it in the era from 2005 to now. This one was difficult because it's not exactly history, even though you could definitely say it is.
Sure.
If you're saying history is made every day or whatever. I think it's more current events because these things are still happening.
And some of them
And
politically charged, for sure.
yeah. One of the aspects, one of the more minor aspects, is I've noticed that in the past decade or two, there's been a lot of renewed interest and investment in passenger rail, which is great. I mean,
I'm with that.
when I go to
Yep.
Boston, I always take the Downeaster, and so in that episode, the main focus of it is gentrification. I don't really want to spoil it too much, but
No.
I split it into two types of gentrification. I say community oriented and developer oriented.
Right.
Community oriented is the one where the community and the people themselves benefit, where developer oriented is the one that we see almost all the time, unfortunately. And it's the one where we build lifestyle centers and developers build hotels and boutiques and buy up blocks and drive out the residents that are already there and make the place unaffordable. And so after that, I kind of put back my writer's hat on, and I gave a little speech. I say that these cities are what we make them, because we are a part of them as much as they are a part of us. They aren't, our cities are not the streets. They aren't the cars. They aren't the buildings. They are us. And so it is our responsibility as members of our community to decide, how do we want our city to develop? How do we want our community to develop?
Now, did you have to ask yourself, because I know, just going back to the politics thing real quick, because obviously this is not a politics project you're doing, and
Right.
kind of like I am not doing a politics podcast, but sometimes
I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole.
I guess that's where it comes down to, right? For me, that's where I get kind of nervous, just as far as hosts of the podcast go, and I talk about it a lot with Mike. Is a lot of these things, the stories you want to tell, whether you like it or not, can bring out a political reaction to the story, even if you try not to make that happen. And sometimes I get scared of covering something or having an episode on something where I'm not confident I can present it in a way that's going to be as inclusive as possible. You know what I mean? That's 100% something that I worry about quite a bit. Did you run into that kind of thing when you were kind of writing, especially in some of the more recent stuff for Dawson?
The recent stuff, yes, but I think the one that I had the most difficulty with in terms of that is number 5, where I talk about the KKK.
Right. Yeah, sure.
And xenophobia. And that was very hard to me. And how I kind of solved that for myself is I made it personal, which is kind of an oxymoron, because usually you don't want to do that. But I said that seeing these pictures of the KKK, it's frightening, because, I mean, in school we learn about them, but they're black and white pictures and they're stills. And so there's distance there.
Sure.
There's a filter between you and that. But as I got older and I found out that, being Franco, my family was a target of that, it kind of made me think twice, and I was just like, wow. And it made that more real. And so with that episode, I decided to go for a more, I guess what you could say, depressing route, more serious route.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think it's depressing.
I mean, it could be. The topic.
I mean, the topic is not a particularly fun topic. That is for sure.
Right.
But it's a story that I didn't get. I'll tell you that before. Like when you talk about, we learned about the KKK in school. Sure. Did I learn about them in New England? Absolutely not. That is not something I was aware of at all until I started reading David Vermette. That was 100% new to me. So no, I think it's super important that you kind of are able to work something like that in, for sure. That's cool. Now, what's up next then? Post Dawson. You got Dawson. Dawson's amazing. What is the follow-up?
Well, right now, as of recording this episode, I am working towards a podcast called Dawson Revisited, where I interview actual experts, not just some college student that
No?
read a few pages, and actually get their expert opinion on these topics which make our New England mill cities. I want to talk to, I'm not going to name any names because that's a surprise.
Sure.
I'm going to talk to people who are involved in the Native American community. I want to talk about people who have done urban planning for consulting firms, or people who are part of urban planning for city government, people who are historians for the Franco-American community, and so on. The real goal with Dawson is diversity of storytelling. And I want to show that in this podcast that I'm working on. So that should, I keep procrastinating and saying, oh, I want to do this just to make the audio a little bit better. I want to do that. What if I just set that setting? So hopefully soon, maybe around the time that this episode will come out, or a little bit after that, I'll have the first episode of Dawson Revisited out.
Very cool. Has it already been recorded?
No.
So we got a guest lined up. You know we want to talk about. You just haven't recorded it yet.
I have a few in mind, but yes, I have. I need to get on that.
No, it's fun. It's a fun having fallen down that rabbit hole myself. I think you're going to find that trip incredibly enjoyable. Well, this has been cool. This has been fun. We've been talking to Daniel Moreau, the creator of the incredible, super interesting Dawson series on YouTube that everybody has to check out. We will put a link in the notes below this episode. Please check it out for sure. Daniel, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jesse. This was awesome.
Now our fathers look at us and sigh with despair, to think that everything they love we simply do not share. But the spirit never dies, our culture will survive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive.
Special thanks to Josie Vachon for providing the music. You can find more about her at josievachon.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Mike Campbell. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at fclpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FCL Podcast for more information about the topics discussed. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this episode.